Awesome. All right. My name is Saskia Fagan. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Innocence Project of Florida. And like I said, I'm really excited about this call tonight. Today is the 11th annual Wrongful Conviction Day observed around the world. And in thinking through kind of like how we wanted to celebrate that, we knew we wanted to come together with folks really dedicated to the work and just to look through, discuss, explore the full landscape of mass incarceration and its impact. So we gathered a number of organizations and really passionate people who are deeply committed to this work and believe that we will see and create a better world in our lifetime. Our intention tonight is to explore the intersections of poverty, policing, and incarceration with a focus on disproportionate impact on marginalized communities and create a space that fosters learning, dreaming, and building as we forge a path forward to discuss what it has and can continue to look like as we build alternatives to the criminal punishment system. So with that, we really want to get grounded as we will be in this space until just about 8 p.m. We have a full agenda with a number of amazing panelists. So we are going to get started in just a second. But before I hand the mic over and introduce everyone and get to know what their work looks like, what their passions are, all of that, I really want to create a space where we can get grounded. This poem was shared by one of our panelists, St. James. There's so much going on in the world outside, and that has an impact on us internally. And really, we're going to get into some of those heavier topics tonight. So before that, we really want to be able to create a space where we can also dream, build. It's about creation as well. So I ask that everyone right now take a couple intentional moments, a couple deep belly breaths wherever you are. If it feels comfortable, if it's safe, you can close your eyes and just take a moment and go within, give yourself some care, and just take a couple intentional moments. I'm going to read this poem by Black feminist revolutionary Assata Shakur. And it's really grounded in this idea that love can be used to fight against discrimination, bigotry, and societal prejudice. And that's the crux of what we're going to be getting into tonight. Love is contraband in hell, cause love is acid that eats away bars. But you, me, and tomorrow hold hands and make vows that struggle will multiply. That hacksaw has two blades. That shotgun has two barrels. We are pregnant with freedom. We are a conspiracy. And with that, I will pass the mic over to our first panelist. We really wanted to get into what brought you into this work, why is it essential, and just going into a little bit about what the mission of your organization is. And the first person we're going to hear that from is Seth Miller from the Innocence Project of Florida.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Saskia, and thank you to all the panelists who are here. I'm super excited to be here to be on this esteemed panel, and we have over 60 attendees, which I'm really thrilled about. So really excited for this conversation. I run the Innocence Project of Florida, and we have a three-pronged mission, and that is to find wrongfully convicted people in Florida's prisons and free them through new evidence that tends to indicate they're actually innocent. After those folks are released, and we've been able to get 34 men and women out of prison who have spent over 700 years in prison combined for crimes they didn't commit. And so naturally, when those folks get out of prison, many of them have been in prison for 10 or 20 or 30 or even over 40 years. It's, as one can imagine, a struggle to reintegrate back in a free society. And so our project, like many others around the country, has a hyper focus on making sure that we can provide the necessary support and assistance in all facets of life so our clients can find stability. Because we know that stability is what will help them overcome the trauma of wrongful incarceration, or really any incarceration. For all that was lost in those years, we have to help them gain in their freedom and to live out their lives for however many years they have left in a positive, productive, and healthy and happy way. The last part of our mission is really the forward-looking part of our mission. That is that we've unfortunately had over 34 or 3,500 known wrongful incarcerations in the country, and that gives us a lot of data about why wrongful convictions happen. And so we do a ton of policy work, working on police reforms, working on court reforms, really anything that can attack the causes of wrongful convictions so we can prevent wrongful convictions in the future. And that's really that forward-looking, proactive work is what is going to make truth and justice a reality in the future. And so it might be the most important part of our work. I mean, I got into this work like many other people because there is an incredible need to provide high quality legal assistance to folks in prison, particularly at a time after they've been in prison for many years where they don't have access to lawyers, don't have access to investigators, don't have access to the resources that are necessary to demonstrate they have a wrongful conviction, demonstrate they're a victim of miscarriage of justice. And so I saw a need and I wanted to be a part of a movement that is going to seek truth and justice on behalf of these individuals. And in terms of why it's essential is because, criminal justice issues oftentimes are hot button issues. They're used as political footballs and in legislatures and in courts all around the country on TV. And oftentimes we don't spend a lot of time thinking about who the subjects are of those systems. And the Innocence movement, working on behalf of people who are wrongfully convicted, has helped kind of create a space where people can begin to accept the fact that these things happen, these miscarriage of justice happen, and work together from all facets of the political spectrum to make changes, to make the system more just and more fair and find freedom for more people. And so it's really helped move the conversation forward on many criminal justice issues that were taboo many years ago, and we're happy to have created a platform for those conversations. I do want to just say one more thing before we pass it on, and that is that last week, a wrongfully convicted gentleman in Missouri, Marcellus Khalifa Williams, was executed by the state of Missouri, murdered by the state of Missouri, despite both having evidence of actual innocence, despite the prosecutors who prosecuted and put him on death row agreeing that his conviction needed to be overturned because they agreed that those prosecutors who tried that case intentionally excluded Black citizens from the jury and created a racially discriminatory jury that convicted him of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. He was executed despite the victim's family not wanting him to be executed, and despite the voices of millions of Americans and people around the world calling to end this miscarriage of justice and prevent this irreparable turn of events, and the state of Missouri didn't care. And so I wanted to just create a moment and and hold space for Marcellus Khalifa Williams, who is the most recent victim of a system that unfortunately doesn't care enough about truth and justice, and is willing to kill innocent individuals.
And with that, I want to bring forward St. James from Black Men Build.
Peace, y'all. And as we like to say among Black Men Build, peace to the nines. I'm St. James, and proud member of Black Men Build's Political Education Committee. And what brought me to this work? Great question. I think I always answer because I'm Haitian. 1804, only successful slave revolution in history. And the spirit of my ancestors runs in my blood. So, I was born into this work. But more specifically, I've been part of movement work all my life, worked for Greenpeace for a while, was part of the Occupy movement, and then a crazy guy in Florida killed a little Black boy named Trayvon Martin. And at the same time, I was giving birth to a beautiful Black boy. He's 11 years old now. He just turned 11. So what brought me to this work is making sure that no other Black boy has to go through what Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown or so many others have had to go through. So that's what brought me into this work. That's what kept me into this work. Why is it essential? I think that's quite obvious. We all deserve to live in a world free of police and prisons where we are not oppressed every single day. And as far as the mission of Black Men Build goes, Black Men Build, where we're organizing our communities, right? We're organizing our communities to build up Black men, to build up Black families. And we are an organization that emphasizes critical thinking. And as critical thinkers, we do live by, we've outlined certain values, certain principles that we do live by. And I particularly want to point to a couple of our values. One of them being value 5, which is we are bonded with Black women and all Black people in the fight for true freedom. So when people hear Black Men Build, Black men, I point to that value. When we say we are bonded with all Black women and all Black people, we do mean Black people of the diaspora, because there's Black people all around the world. And we do mean Black gender non-conforming folks as well. I'd also like to point you to our 6th value, our 6th principle, our 6th bar. We have 9 bars, right? And it outlines basically what we're fighting for. Number 6 talks about humane and restorative accountability and justice for wrongs committed, and an economic social program directed at the true causes of violence, poverty, racism, and patriarchy. So in a nutshell, we are an abolitionist organization. We are working towards the abolition of police and prisons. And our 7th bar, which is an end to all US wars, foreign and domestic, covert and overt, by all known and unknown branches of the US government. And we do specifically mean the war going on domestically with police in our neighborhoods. There is a war going on. That's why we have Wartime, a publication that we put out. And we do mean the wars going on all around the world that the United States is involved in through imperialism. We stand in solidarity with Palestine. We stand in solidarity with Congo. We stand in solidarity with Sudan. We stand in solidarity with Haiti, and the invasion currently happening there right now has to stop. So when we say an end to all US wars, foreign and domestic, that's what we mean. And yeah, that's what Black Men Build is all about.
Thank you so much, St. James. And with that, I will pass the mic to Alyssa Akbar.
Thank you so much. Hey folks, my name is Alyssa Akbar and I'm a policy associate with Worth Rises. Just before I get into it, I do want to say thank you to the Innocence Project of Florida for bringing us all together. I'm very excited to be here tonight. But yeah, a little background on me. I'm originally from Florida and I grew up in the state as the queer daughter of 2 immigrant parents. And so I think out of necessity and out of trying to find hope for my communities, I've been really organizing and advocating legislatively on a variety of issues that impact the people that I love since I was a junior in high school. And a really big focus of my organizing work has been on police and prison abolition, which is how I found myself intrigued and a part of the work that Worth Rises does. Worth Rises is a nonprofit advocacy organization that's dedicated to really tackling the ways that the prison industry is exploiting incarcerated people and their loved ones across the country. In practice, we target corporations that are invested in the criminal justice system and really seek to return those economic resources back into the hands of those that are most affected. In my role as a policy associate at Worth Rises, I am tasked with leading our Connecting Families campaigns up and down the East Coast, as well as in the Midwest. Our Connecting Families campaigns are ones that aim to make prison and jail communications free for incarcerated people and their loved ones. So think of things like phone calls, video calls, and electronic messaging. All of those services are encompassed in our Connecting Families campaigns. Worth Rises has been pushing back on the prison telecom industry since as far back as 2018, where we successfully passed a bill that established free phone calls within New York City's jails. And since that success, we've really expanded our reach with these campaigns and are currently working in over a dozen states in the fight to make prison and jail communications free. So far, we've been able to pass this legislation in 5 states, including Connecticut, California, Colorado, Minnesota, and Massachusetts. Now, there's a number of reasons why we push for free communications. And first and foremost, it's because incarcerated people and their families oftentimes have to pay exorbitant rates just to be able to stay connected. And so policies that make communications free, again, first and foremost, relieve that financial burden that couples, some of the themes that we're going to talk about today, including mass incarceration and poverty, and ensuring that incarcerated people can stay connected to the people that they love, without having that enormous financial burden looming over them. But even beyond that, communication is a vital part of all of our lives, whether it's, texting your family member or giving your mom a quick call. All of us know the importance of communication in our everyday lives, and that doesn't go away when a person is incarcerated. And so making that communication free and accessible for incarcerated people also has an enormous string of benefits. It allows incarcerated people to plan for their release in a more successful way, which improves reentry, lowers recidivism. It can also, help strengthen families and mitigate trauma for children of incarcerated parents. And so this is really an issue that I'm excited to highlight during today's conversation, but Worth Rises focuses again on a very general scale on pushing back corporations and making sure that the profits that are being reaped from our carceral system are ending or close to ending in the future. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alyssa. And I'm going to pass it off to Shatara Thompson from the Healing and Justice Center.
Hi, I'm Shatara with the Healing and Justice Center. I'm going through my social work master's program and learning about mental health and just seeing in college about mental health and going through family-wise. It brought me to the Healing and Justice Center because in the Black and Brown community, mental health is very stigmatized, and you have to be deemed crazy to go see a psychiatrist or go to therapy, or we don't hold space for one another when something traumatic happens in the family. It's always what's done in this household. Don't say it to anything. Don't take it outside the house. So with that being said, the Healing and Justice Center is a nonprofit organization. Our motto is to reduce police presence and violence in Overtown and Liberty City. We believe that providing social services to those that are in the community will reduce the way that they see mental health and impact the way that they receive treatment. We do this by providing different things, like such as my role as the mobile crisis manager. We have a mobile crisis for short-term crises. So anyone experiencing a crisis, whether it's mental health, whether they don't have that space at home or in their community, we hold space for them to be able to talk about what's bothering them or what's going on with them as far as their mental health. We do not involve police at all within our model. Our model contains a crisis interventionist and a medic, because we do recognize that police often do more harm than they do good. Police are often 17 times more likely to shoot and kill a person that's experiencing mental health than actually helping them. So we also offer a trauma recovery center, which is a national model that started out of California, which is a therapy model. So this encompasses not just therapy, but case management, because we realize nobody cares about therapy if my basic needs not being met. So if I don't have food, I don't have water, I don't have housing, I can't think about healing myself, healing my trauma, unless I could go home to a safe environment. So our national TRC model encompasses both therapy and case management at the same time, and not waiting for them to be healed first to go into case management. We also know that kids are our future, especially in Overtown and Liberty City. There are very limited resources when it comes to after-school programs, in-school programs, or just in general for kids. So we offer youth programming that encompasses both in school and outside of school. In school, we teach them about emotional intelligence. We teach them how to feel their feelings and address what they're feeling, and not just have their root cause of being anger. We also have mentorship for kids and children, so they know they have someone who's been on a course that they want to go on, or help them go on a course that they think they want to go on, because we all know that being within community helps. Our main motto really is that the community could govern themselves. You don't need outside resources. You don't need police to come in and and make sure that you're following the rules or doing what's self. When the mobile crisis, our name was Freedom House. That came from Philadelphia, where the first ambulance services were made. The whole point of having the ambulance service in Philadelphia when they made it was because those that the police wasn't doing right by them, that those that were injured. They learned that when the police was coming to take them to the hospital, that they were driving recklessly, not providing the life-saving care that they needed in the back. So a group of Black men came together and decided, hey, let's create our own services. Let's treat our own people. Let's take care of our own people because we know what they need. And that's how our first ambulatory service came about. So our name is a homage to them. We also have, we work with different partners such as Circle of Brotherhood, Dade County Street Response, Touching Miami with Love, and as well as Dream Defenders. These different organizations build our coalition so we can provide a wraparound services to those that's in the community. Circle of Brotherhood is a very known organization within the Liberty City that provides mentorship, that provides NAAA meetings and so much more to the community because they realize that we can only govern ourselves. We can't have somebody from outside our community govern us because the only people who know what the problem is as well as the solution are the ones that's living in that community. So with that being said, this is what we would like to highlight going into this is just the fact that mental health, we know that mental health is on a rise. And the things that we have and policies that we have set in place right now is not decreasing mental health. It's making it worse. It's exacerbating it.
Thank you, Maya. Or Shatara, I'm so sorry. We are gonna have Maya Ragsdale from Beyond the Bars come up next.
Hey everyone, I'm Maya. I co-lead Beyond the Bars with Kat, who really wanted to be here today, but ended up not being able to come. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about our work, about the context that we're coming from, and then a little bit about my own connection to what we do. So our work, I would say, I think a lot of times within the abolitionist movement, we hear talk about divest, invest, right? And people talk about services such as jobs and housing. And I think our particular intervention is really on this jobs part. Jobs are not, we don't consider jobs a service. Jobs are an economic structure that actually kind of like structure every part of your everyday life and every way that the economy functions. And so we think about who is it that's creating the jobs? How is it that they're actually treating workers? Which workers are they excluding? Which workers are they including? And in what ways are they including them? And so we are the first worker center in the country that specifically organizes workers who have criminal records. We're a membership-based organization. We do our best to develop our members, to lead our programs, and we function through organizing, advocacy, and research, education, and we provide support to people from our base. In terms of what that looks like, we are kind of focused on 3 different sets of issues. One is about work while people are incarcerated, whether they're in prison, jail, or work release camps. In Florida, once you get to, often you go through sort of the prison system, then you go into work release before you're released back into the community. In work release, this Florida state prison system garnishes 60% of your wages. And so we have staff members and people who are just members of our organization who come home after working 40, 50 hours a week and bringing home $14. And so this is one sort of aspect of this type of exploitation. The second way is through the probation system, which is something that I've been through myself, where essentially if you're on probation, there are work requirements, and if you don't work, you can get sent back to jail. And then on top of that, there's tons of different ways that probation interferes with your ability to even hold a job. Having meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, or when you're supposed to be at work, tons of community service hours, like all kinds of things that just make it really, really difficult to keep a job. And so that's another thing that we focus on. And then the last section is really like, okay, you're off probation, you're off work, you're out of work release, you're no longer in prison, but you still have a criminal record. And so what we see is a lot of our people find jobs through temp agencies, which are super exploitative sort of ways for, that people are working through. And so, yeah, in terms of our mission, we are confronting private sector corporations, municipal, state, and federal agencies to try to raise wage floors and increase worker protections in the industries most reliant on the labor of incarcerated and criminalized workers. I think we can skip this. I can talk a little bit more about this later.
That's the last slide.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and so I think, I think just kind of the last note is that we really firmly believe in the need for labor to adopt these sorts of issues as their own. 1/3 of people in the US have a criminal record. That is the impact of mass incarceration, right? 1/3 of workers. Yet this is something that the labor movement has not taken on as its issue. The labor movement is one of the last sort of organized forces, progressive forces that actually have political power, that have resources, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so what would it look like for labor to actually mobilize in support of our issues? So that's the last thing that I'm going to say, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Maya. And I will pass it to Stephen from LatinoJustice.
Thank you so much, Saskia and Florida Innocence Project, my fellow panelists here. It's really great to be here with you. Maya, I love you, I see you. Black Men Build, we're working on here in Orlando. So I'm really, really grateful to be here. So my name is Stephen Mangual. I'm the Justice Advocate Coordinator with LatinoJustice PRLDEF out of the Southeast region. That means that we have an office in Orlando, but I am able to work throughout the Southeast, including working in Virginia with the Virginia Coalition on Solitary and working in Georgia with the Georgia GLAR, which is the Georgia Latino Human Rights Organization there, which does a lot of work with the Latino community on human rights. And so we've been really doing work. I've been able to do that. So, but the office here in Orlando and in the Southeast has only been around for 10 years only, but yeah, we celebrated 10 years this year. So I'm really proud to be part of that and to be here during this historical period with what's happening. But the organization started in New York. LatinoJustice is a 52-year-old Latinx civil rights organization, and it is run still mostly by what we call movement lawyers. And so we use litigation and direct advocacy from the movement lawyers, as well as people like myself, non-attorney advocates. And we've been around, like I said, we've been around for 52 years. And in that time, we've grown from just being in New York. I mentioned Florida, but we also have an office in Texas, and that is our Southwest office. And so we've grown, really doubled in size since I've joined the organization. I've been with the organization 4 years, a little over 4 years now, as of last month. And we are guided by what folks would normally call legal departments, but it's really, we call them pillars. And so we have 6 pillars of work, including our racial justice. I'm sorry, 5 pillars of work, including our racial justice initiative. That's why I'm thinking it's 6. And I am part of what we call the criminal justice pillar, our Re-Envision Justicia pillar. But I've been blessed to do some cross-pillar work with our voting rights pillar in our national campaign called Cada Voto Cuenta, translated Every Vote Counts, which is a campaign where we do a lot of election protection work. And it's been a blessing for me to be someone who is formerly incarcerated, literally working, in front of these, polls in very interesting places like Georgia and here throughout Florida. And so LatinoJustice, like I said, it champions human rights, equality. Our mission, our values are all about, protecting human dignity, empowering people, empowering communities. We don't just use litigation and direct advocacy, but a lot of us, the advocates, we do what's called community education. A lot of our work falls around community education and also organizational and coalition building. And then, of course, trainings, trainings and workshops, which is like one of my calling. This is what I think is my calling, really. And so that's LatinoJustice, a little bit about me. Born and raised in the Bronx. What brings me to this work is that when I was around 9, 10 years old, I saw my mother get arrested. and I saw the cops came in, and just pretty much destroyed our home. And that's pretty much what brought me, because that changed my life. I acquired about 6 arrests by the time I turned 20, and then I wound up turning 21 in the Bronx House of Detention, facing a life bid. And I did 14 years in the New York State Departments of Corrections, and being with Latino Justice here and being able to do work which includes ending solitary confinement. These are some of my priorities. Juvenile justice, where I'm able to, create a program where we're targeting juveniles who've been convicted of felonies that now, because of the Juvenile Expungement Act of 2022, speaking specifically in the state of Florida, they're able to get their records expunged now as long as they're not what's called forcible felonies. And so that's just something that's awesome for me to be a part of, because when we're talking about how the organization's values and mission is directly tied to not just me, but my work, that is just one example of how, or actually 2 examples, solitary and juvenile justice, that really ties the work together. And I'll end there and talk about the rest later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Yeah, I have really appreciated connecting with all these folks, and it was really important for us to have representation from many different sectors of the work that's happening on the ground, because when we look at the landscape of mass incarceration, it's really large. But when we look at the people who are doing the work, the grassroots movement, like, it is also large, and we wanted to really highlight that, the work that is happening, and really ground ourselves in what is possible. So as we transition, the flyer for the teach-in had Angela Davis. So I'd be remiss not to quote our elder in this work. Our prisons do not disappear social problems. They disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when the human beings contending with them are relegated to cages. I'm going to pass the mic back to Stephen for him to ground us in the framework, kind of how we got here. And I'd also like to mention, because we connected before this call, that you'll be celebrating 18 years home as of coming up. And so I wanted to mention that, because you didn't mention that in your intro. So passing to Stephen.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy. Like, I'm in New York right now. We're having a staff retreat, and it just happens to be during a time when my anniversary is coming from, what we call our freedomversary. So in 4 days, I will be celebrating 18 years home, and that is just huge for me, because I have 4 years out over more. Like, I was always, you know how it is. It's just 14 in, 14 out. All right, now it's 18 out. Anyway, yeah, it is a blessing, and thank you for that. I'm grateful and glad that I'm here and I'm still alive and able to do this work. So, as part of the historic framework, what I really want to share was really a historical context, because when it comes to the landscape of Florida, I'm sure some of the other folks are gonna share. And the only thing I will share is the pie from the Prison Policy Institute that shows, the numbers with regards to Florida. And I'm not sure if anybody is gonna mention that, but I just wanted to highlight that. And it's okay if we mention it again. And it's because when you're looking at Florida specifically, you're looking at every single aspect of racialized mass incarceration that exists in the country exists in the state of Florida, right? And so we're talking about, Maya mentioned probation. It's over 211,000 people, 211,000 people on probation right now in the state of Florida. That's not counting the few people who are on other types of supervision, which do exist. We're talking about a Florida Department of Corrections that houses 96,000 people, right? That's just the state. But in total, we have over 176,000 people incarcerated in the state of Florida, right? We have ICE detention centers. We have private prisons. We have children's prisons. We have a horrible system that is called direct file that sends children into the adult system, right? So then that's part of the landscape. And I'm not going to get too much into that, because what I wanted to share was, how, the roots of policing here in this country, and how it's directly tied to, the slave patrols. And so for those that don't know, right after the, Emancipation Proclamation and the signing of the 13th Amendment, Black folks, African people, right, were freed, quote unquote, right? And so now what happened is, the property owners, right, property in this section, and I apologize if this is being a little, but property in this example being human beings, right, Black human beings, like, they had to figure a way where now, we need this labor. We still need this slave labor. We still need this free labor, And how do we do it with the passing of the, Emancipation Proclamation? And so they started creating these laws, during Reconstruction, right after the signing of the proclamation in 1863. And they created these patrols to go after people who were just free, right? And made up these laws like the Black Codes and vagrancy laws and all of these laws that were made to criminalize anything that Black folks did, anything that the freed African people did. And I want to mention that it wasn't just Black folks, and this is where I want to lead into in a minute, because all of us know about Jim Crow, and this is what I'm talking about, this era of Jim Crow, where they wind up creating these laws, capturing people and bringing them back through a system of literally, a system of these slave patrols, the judges in the courts who would sentence people, and then it was a very, if you haven't, I can't get into it, but read Slavery by Another Name, and you will see the system that still continues to today. It was a system where law enforcement, the courts, and the slave masters and the property owners were in cahoots together to make sure they continued this slave labor, free labor, right? And this was something that was not just taking place in the Southeast and throughout the South and in the Northeast, which it was, but it was also taking place in the West and the Midwest. So this history of legacy it wasn't just taking place in this part. So Latino justice is the first place where I heard the term Juan Crow. We heard of Jim Crow, but how many of us heard of Juan Crow, right? This was happening in the Midwest. The Texas Rangers, which was founded in 1835, was a paramilitary force, and this is exactly what they were doing over there to our, Mexican and Chicano and a Latino family in that side of the country. Because what was happening, remember, this is the time frame. I'm sorry, I'm a history buff, but folks were heading west. White folks were heading west, and they were taking over, lands that belonged to indigenous people and the African people that also were there with them as well. And so remember that, the United States went to war with Mexico and took over half of their territory, right? This is what I'm talking about. This is all connected, and it's all related to policing, the roots of policing and how policing is used today. Fast forward during the Civil Rights era, during, the Mexican American movement, Black Power movement, Puerto Rican independence movement, the hyper militarized system of law enforcement just kept growing and growing and growing, and this is what we're seeing today. And so I wanted to make sure that when we talk about and think about policing, there is a historical root directly tied to slavery. And when you look at a police officer today, and I like to just quote KRS when he talked about that, and he says, he says officer. It's the same thing. Officer. And so I'll leave it right there, and just please, it's so important to be connected to this historical, perspective of it and understand that. So when you look at it today, you have like a better understanding and know what to do, because it ain't just about knowing, now what you do with what you know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for grounding us in that and wanting to bring St. James up to continue that framework.
Yeah, very well put, Stephen. And we can't talk about the state of Florida without doing some land acknowledgements and screaming for land back. So in Miami, this is the Tequesta land. And in the state of Florida has a very rich history of indigenous people and escaped slaves, runaway slaves, getting together to fight this wicked system of Jim Crow and slavery, right? So we want to bring it back to the beginning, the roots of all this, right? We're talking about police, prisons, and poverty, right? And within those three things, there is a common thread, and that common thread would be capitalism. Capitalism, if we understand it as the economic system that gave birth to all of this, capitalism in itself is a system of exploitation, right? Now, as he was saying, slavery really never ended in this country. 13th Amendment, if y'all know, it said that slavery is actually still legal as punishment for a crime. So slavery never really ended in this country. It actually continued in the prison system. And same with the origins of policing in this country. Policing came from runaway escaped slave patrols. And the thing to understand when he's talking about property is that Black bodies were property in this country. And in the United States by 1860, enslaved people were valued at approximately $3 billion. Today in 2024, that would be 10 trillion. $10 trillion. Basically, enslaved people in the Americas were the largest financial asset in the entire world. Y'all really think they was gonna let that go easily? So throughout history, we have 1804. We have in Haiti, slave people fighting to be free. We have the Seminole Wars fighting for Florida to be free. We got Nat Turner. We got John Brown. We got all these entities fighting to be free. So don't believe none of this nonsense about Abraham Lincoln. Let's best believe, just like 1804 in Haiti, in America, Black people freed themselves, okay? Happy Juneteenth to y'all. Juneteenth is every single damn day. Excuse my language. So yeah, Black people in freeing themselves in this country, the capitalists, mostly white, would not let that go, and basically transferred the plantation system into the prison system, and transferred the slave patrols into the police system, which is what we have going on today. And a lot of those slave patrols, they didn't just become police officers, they also became military men, right? They also joined the army. So back in the early 1900s, when the United States Marines invaded Haiti, it was those same KKK, Confederate-loving, extremely racist white boys that were sent to Haiti. And they basically executed a bunch of indigenous people, executed a lot of Black people. There was a huge rebellion that was going on. But what happened is that the US Marines went into the Bank of Haiti and stole all the gold, stole all the money, and that gave birth to Citibank as we know it today. Citibank, y'all know that bank today? It was all funded with money from the from Haiti. All gold, funded with gold from Haiti. So you got Wells Fargo, you got Citibank, you got all these banks, all these financial institutions that have been born off of war and slavery. I mean, if you're talking about Wall Street in New York itself was actually a slave auction block, right? Where they sold slaves. So when, you know, slavery ended or was transformed, that system didn't stop, right? They just figured out other ways to exploit the world and exploit people all over the world. So when we're talking about police, prisons, and poverty, understand it's all a result of capitalism, and that this country was born of slavery, and that is what continues today within these prison systems and on these streets with these police. So I'll leave it there because I'm sure all these other panelists have a lot to say, and I would love for my man Chico to speak about some of the great work we've been doing down here against the prison systems.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the work and what it looks like now in just a second. I first want to kind of bring all of these things together in a tangible example. And I'm really appreciating Seth for starting us off with a grounding in the urgency of this work and bringing Marcellus Khalifa Williams to the center. And want to continue in that and showing what this looks like and how it's impacting people every day with a current case. Seth?
Thank you, Saskia. And I just want to, before I talk about this case, I want to build on something that Stephen was talking about. And when I think about this conversation, I think about, you know, metaphors like the hamster wheel and infinite loops and cycles of violence that we find ourselves in. I think this is what you were referring to, Stephen, is, you know, we see this from my perch, looking at the system, sort of at the end of the process. I see this constantly. You know, my clients start being over-policed in schools. They find their way into the criminal legal system. Their communities are over-policed. The police round up usual suspects. They operate in criminal investigations with tunnel vision. The laws as we know them, they used to be more liberal in terms of you know, sentences and what are crimes, but now more things are crimes and more crimes have the longest of sentences. We have every kind of sentencing enhancement provision such that once you sort of get in that cycle of, oh, I got out of prison and now I'm getting picked up for something else, that thing, while maybe not serious, is going to get you a life sentence in Florida. And so this is how we have the ballooning of the population in Florida's prisons, and how we sort of can't get it down, because after all, in Tallahassee every year, we make more things crimes and make more things have life sentences, more things allow for sentencing enhancements. And the way this manifests in my work, and a brief sort of case capsule that I want to talk about, is the case of our client, Thomas Gilbert. And so when I was a younger lawyer in this work, I got a guy out named James Bain, who had been in for 35 years when I was only 30 years old. And I thought, I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to get to the age where, and I will, but I thought I was at that age where I might stop getting people out of prison who went to prison before I was born. But Thomas Gilbert, I'm 45, I just turned 45 2 weeks ago, and Thomas Gilbert went to prison for a crime he didn't commit in Miami in 1973. So he has now been in for 50 years wrongfully incarcerated. It's a simple robbery case of a couple at a motel. One member of the couple was shot and unfortunately was killed. And he was picked up, and on a single eyewitness identification, he was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to life in prison. What's crazy about this case is that even in 1973, shortly in the years after that, where we didn't really have a sensitivity to the idea that a wrongful conviction could happen, people came forward to say that this other person confessed to the crime. And the authorities in Miami did a reinvestigation of the case where they had all this evidence that indicated that Thomas Gilbert didn't commit the crime, that they knew who the actual perpetrator was, that individual confessed to the crime. Other individuals came forward to say that that individual and his co-defendant confessed to the crime, and said that our client Thomas Gilbert was innocent. They gave polygraphs, which, for whatever they're worth, everyone passed them. They found the person who gave these individuals the gun, and he said Thomas Gilbert was innocent. And while we don't know for sure they know why they didn't let Thomas Gilbert out of prison, why they didn't overturn his conviction, we do understand that they didn't feel they had enough evidence to go after the one Black individual who they thought committed the crime. So because they couldn't put another Black person in prison, another Black man in prison, they left an innocent Black man in prison, and he's been there for 50 years. And it wasn't until we found out about this investigation in 2018, so almost over 30 years later, or I'm sorry, 40 years later, that we started to move on his case. And we unfortunately didn't win his case. Our key witness was murdered in the middle of our legal proceedings, and it caused the dismissal of our legal work in order to get him out of prison. And he still remains in prison. I think when we talk about poverty, like in the way it impacts outcomes in the system, I think about what happened with Thomas Gilbert. He knew there was this reinvestigation in his case, but he didn't know all about it. He didn't know the result of it. And they never gave him the information so he could go into court and press. He didn't have a lawyer, because we don't give lawyers to people in prison unless they're on death row after the first couple stages of the process. He didn't have money to get public records. Simple things like when you ask for public records, which many of you probably do in your job, they said, well, you have to pay all this money to get pieces of paper, in this case, to get his evidence of innocence, and he couldn't afford it. And so he just languished, and until he got folks like us who could help him, and we weren't even able to succeed on his behalf. And what that long-term incarceration has done to him, this would happen to anyone, but it's exacerbated by knowing that you're there for a crime you didn't commit, is that his mental health has deteriorated substantially over the years. He's been disconnected from his family, in a cage. He was out for a short period of time, for a period of months on parole, got sent back for a technical violation. In that time, he fathered a child who has never known him outside prison, and the impact of his wrongful incarceration is not only on him, his family. His son, who has never known him, is wrongfully convicted and incarcerated by association, all the same. And so, at every stage, we have entry points for racism, for violence, and ways that poverty impacts outcomes. And Thomas Gilbert's case, it's an incredible travesty of justice. is, probably in my experience, in my practice, the longest wrongful incarceration that I've seen, and one that has to be fixed. It's a miscarriage of justice that has to be righted. And at this point, the only thing we can do is speak loudly about it and raise our voices about it. And I'm happy, Saskia, that you've given us an opportunity to talk about that here, because it's with groups like this, with people who are watching, who can put pressure on the authorities in these locations to not look away from miscarriages of justice, but instead lean into them and fix them.
Yeah, so much. Thank you so much, Seth. I think the chat had been disabled, but I think we figured it out with the Q&A. If you want to learn more, sign the petition we have to help free Thomas Gilbert. You can click the website link in the Q&A. And we want to shift over into diving more into some of these topics. And I want to start off with Chico, first for you to introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about your work within Black Men Build, especially as someone who is formerly incarcerated, and get into how we can better advocate on behalf of these things that we're seeing if we know these short-term fixes, these reforms aren't really addressing the root problems and issues that we're seeing. What is really necessary to transform?
How y'all doing? Chico Gunder, Miami, Florida, Black Man Bill. That's an interesting question. There's a lot behind that. Being that I'm a formerly incarcerated person, I also was a correction officer at the Juvenile Detention Center and the state prison for 12 years prior to my conviction. So the criminal justice system is terrible on both sides. As an officer, is law set to actually not reform or not to, really help people better themselves in prison. A guard job is just to stand there and make sure they are just there, just to make sure they're there. There's nothing as a guard for you to make sure somebody is actually rehabilitating themselves or making themselves better. As an inmate, they teach you to be a savage. They teach you to just try to survive this ordeal that you're going through. And then they have a reentry program that is terrible. When you get ready to go home from prison, they give you a piece of paper that basically states, hey, here are some places you go look for a job, go look. It's nothing really to help you. Since I've been home from prison, I've tried to come up with programs that can help people come home from prison. So myself with one of my partners named Iggy, he's a member of the Circle of Brotherhood also. We came up with this thing called VIP Reentry, where we actually try to help people when they come home from prison. We work on, like the young lady said, the purpose of the importance of the phone calls and stuff is to strengthen family bonds, because you got guys who've been gone for 15, 20 years who haven't spoken to any of their family members at all. But then you expect those guys to get released and go out into the community and just be, law-abiding citizens, or they just going home to nothing. So those were some of the things that I feel like we need to address right away. One of the other things as Black Men Build, we feel that mental health is one of the major things. So we created the men's circles, and we also have women's circles also, but we created the circles to try to just have an outlet for men to be able to talk about their feelings and things they're going through, incarcerated men along with just regular working class men. There's so many things that Black Men Build are trying to do. So right now, in every state we're in right now, we have the men's circle going on. We just finished a 10-city tour on men's mental health with the men's circles throughout the country. We went to, it was 10 cities we went to. Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta. Man, so many of them. I can't remember all of them. I went on all the city tours, but this tour was a success. We had a lot of people to turn out to it. And we have, since we've done it, we got a lot of feedback from where a lot of men are saying how much this is needed throughout the country. So the mental health portion of it is one of the main things that Black Men Build is focusing on. Then we also trying to build these men politically. We're trying to politically educate them, to bring them into the fold to help, strengthen our communities. We want them to come home productive men when they come home from prison. So right now in Miami, we actually have a reentry program that I've been running myself. Like I said, the guys come home, already made partnerships with certain companies in Miami, certain schools that are giving these guys a chance at getting a CDL license, their plumbing license and stuff like that for free. They also have an entrepreneur program that we're using to help guys who want to start their own businesses when they come home from prison. So there's so many things that we're doing here in Miami in Black Men Build. We're trying to expand it nationwide, but we're working on it state by state. But I was able to go to a conference that we had in Minneapolis with the other organization, and they told us the importance of the phone calls and stuff like that. So we are partnering with them on a campaign to try to get that into the Florida prisons and into the Miami jails. So there's a lot that we got going on right now that we're trying to really work on, because we just know the system is totally messed up. Myself, I was convicted for a crime I didn't commit, went to prison. Guy was committed. Had the same charges I had. He got probation and house arrest, and I got 5 years in prison. So the system is, it's just really messed up. I took my time in there and actually educated myself, politically educated myself, and found out more about what's going on in the community. And like I said, since I've been home, I've been a part of active campaigns. One was the Amendment 4, where we got 1.6 million felons that right back to vote. The other one was the Women's Dignity Act, where we helped incarcerated women to feel protected in prison, so that male guards shouldn't be searching or, and providing proper hygiene to the female prisoners. So it's a lot of stuff myself and Black Man Bill have been doing, and there's more stuff we plan to work on in the future.
Much appreciated, Chico. I think part of what came up there a few times was the importance of connection while inside. And I want to bring Alyssa back up to really speak on some of those things, the impact and just the overlap.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that back up. Especially for, well, let me start. Let me take a step back. I mentioned in my introduction that communication plays an extremely important role in all of our lives. And it's not something that goes away when someone is incarcerated. Connection is a human need. We need to be connected to the people around us. We need to be connected to our loved ones. It is essential. And I would argue that especially for incarcerated people, it becomes even more of a necessity as people, serve their time as a mental and emotional outlet to engage in your own rehabilitation, to prepare for reentry, to reduce tension as you're serving your time. There's a number of studies and research that we can point to say that family contact has enormous benefits for not only the incarcerated person, but for their families as well, for children of folks that are incarcerated. And so, really want to highlight that our ability and our fight against the prison telecom industry, really focusing on making those communications free and ensuring that people have access to quality phone calls, video calls, electronic messaging, whatever it is, with their families. It's essential. And I want to talk especially about reentry and what that looks like when someone is connected to their families. So, when we talk about these cases where folks are spending 5, 10, 15 plus years incarcerated, it is very hard for families and for incarcerated people alike to maintain that contact, especially in states that are charging these exorbitant fees when it comes to phone calls. I'm not sure if we're going to bring this up a little later, but in the state of Florida, if you were to call someone within a state correctional facility, it would cost you $2.03 for one 15-minute phone call. And I really want to let that sink in, because if you have a family member that's incarcerated and you're calling them maybe once a day, maybe once a week, that is a cost that can add up exponentially over time. I've talked to people in Florida and other states that are spending thousands of dollars a year just to be able to stay in contact with their loved ones. And the reality of it is that children in Florida, family members in Florida, are not able to maintain those relationships with incarcerated people because of this exorbitant rate. It's quite unfortunate because those that can't afford it, they have one of two options. Either they lose contact with the person that they love, or they go without basic necessities to be able to afford these phone calls. So I wanted to highlight this, and thank you, Saskia, for pulling up this map. So you'll see that we highlighted Florida. Again, the phone call rate for a state facility is $2.03. Florida is one of the worst states in the country when it comes to making these phone calls affordable to incarcerated people and their families. But I also want to highlight the county map of Florida that is on this slide as well. If you're in a local jail, that cost of a phone call might be much higher than it would be if you were in a state facility. So you know, I highlighted the maximum cost for a 15-minute phone call in a county jail is $5.63. That's in Nassau County. And really, most of Florida's counties are doing very poorly when it comes to making these phone calls accessible. And so this is something that we continue to tackle, again, because it sets people up for success as they re-enter their communities. But also strengthens family bonds, helps mitigate that trauma that families experience as their family members are incarcerated. And, you know, I'll go a step further and say that, especially in communities where poverty is prevalent, and, you know, we all understand that this is an issue that is not being tackled by the state legislature, by folks that can really help when it comes to tackling poverty. Actually, the state of Florida is actively criminalizing poverty as we speak. It's very telling the ways that they kind of very cyclically criminalize poverty, and then when people are incarcerated, continue to exploit them, exploit their basic needs for more profit. So, you know, the state of Florida can be doing a lot better to set people up for success while they're serving their time and as they seek to re-enter our communities.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alyssa. And wanting to bring Stephen up to also kind of speak to some of these things and also looking both in the short term and in the long term, like what this looks like.
Thank you for that. So I want to just use like one example of one of the campaigns. So I mentioned earlier the pie, right? So in the state of Florida, we're talking about, you know, 176,000 people that are incarcerated, right? So think about that number just for a second. 176,000 people who are confined and incarcerated. It'd be nice if you put the LatinoJustice up so people could know where I'm at. It ain't even a shameless plug. It is an awesome plug. I love my organization. Very proud. I forgot to say that we are run by our Madam President, you know, President General Counsel Lourdes Rosado, who I'm very proud of. Anyway, so think about the people, everyone who goes through the jail and the confinement system as someone who is going to experience lockdowns and solitary confinement, isolation, whatever name, restrictive confinement, whatever name they call it. You know, there's not one person, and we're learning this, you know, nationally. There's not one person that goes through the system that doesn't experience it in some way, shape, or form. It may not be that 15-day Nelson Mandela, you know, limit and rule where we said that, you know, not we, and we, the international community said that if you held a person in this type of confinement, which means in the same space from 22 to 24 hours a day, doesn't matter what that space is, right? It could be a shower, which they do in the state of Florida. And they say because it's overstaffing, but they do it throughout the country. It's in Virginia, they have lockdowns regularly. Actually, there's probably a lockdown right now taking place in Red Onion, you know, because it's always happening. So what happens, you know, in the state of Florida, out of that number, right, that I gave, there's approximately 10,000 people. First of all, everybody experiences it in some way, shape, or form, right? So remember what happens through that experience, you know, and I'll come back to that because I'm a solitary survivor. We have 10,000 people in the state of Florida that are in solitary confinement. Now, just think about that number for a minute. 10,000 people that are currently held in this type of extreme isolation, torture, right? Who the majority are going to wind up coming home. And so when we're talking about some of the, you know, when we ask the question about some of the actual implications of incarceration, this is just one example where we have people who go through this type of extreme isolation and torture and will be released one day. And when they are released, mind you, when you're in the box, I forgot to say, we call it the box, we call it the bing. when in Rikers Island. When you're in the box, you're not getting any type of vocational training. You're not getting no type of educational. You're not getting no type of consistent medical treatment. You're not getting no mental health treatment. You're just locked in there with your thoughts. And if you're lucky, you could get yourself, some reading materials. But the reality is, like, you have no human contact. You have sensory deprivation. This is all the things. So now what happens is that the psychological effects that take place are for life. There's no turning back. There is no turning back. I've been home 18 years. I've been out of the box for 19 years. I still suffer from insomnia, anxiety, depression. I still need to be in therapy, And so when we're talking about the work, and here is that we were able to create the Florida Coalition on Solitary, which is part of the National Unlock the Box campaign. And that is just, a real life solution, and a place and a space for people like me and people like us who, go through that experience and now are looking for, a place to even be understood. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think part of what you're bringing up is some of the direct impacts when it comes to mental health and community care, and wanting to bring Shatara up to speak to some of those short-term fixes and how it doesn't work when we think about just reforming and not really getting to the root problems and the work that the Healing and Justice Center is doing and centering in South Florida.
Yeah, as Stephen mentioned, being in solitary confinement does not do well for mental health. It either creates an exacerbation of the reoccurring mental health, pre-existing mental health that they have, or it creates an acute onset of an acute mental health illness. More than about half of the people who are in prison or in jail who have experienced solitary confinement do end up committing suicide. And that should be a problem right there. That take a minute to think about that. Half of the people who have experienced solitary confinement commit suicide inside jail. And that's a problem. We need to address mental health through not locking up people. That's America's de facto, is locking them up in prisons, locking them up in jail. What about other alternatives? The main cause, a lot of people who have mental health issues, they feel like there's a correlation between mental health and violence, and that's not the case. Those who suffer from mental health are not violent. They shouldn't be locked up. And those who do suffer from mental health, they often are locked up because of misdemeanors such as trespassing or nuisance laws. Like you stated before, in Florida, they're arresting those that are homeless, those that are unhoused. And all that's doing is filling up the prison system and not addressing the root causes such as homelessness, such as substance abuse. So for short-term alternatives, I would say Miami, Florida, we need to invest in sobering centers. One of my colleagues that's on this call in Oregon, he was telling me about Cahoots and how they have sobering centers. So often we get calls from the police, from law enforcement saying, hey, this person is trespassing. This person is under the influence of whatever substance they're using. Can you come pick them up instead of us writing them a trespassing ticket, instead of us having to take them to jail? There are many alternatives, because we know that if you're suffering from a mental illness, they don't like the way that the meds feel. So they decide to self-medicate. They have substance use problems, and we need to address that cause. We need to put them in sobering centers. We need to create more mobile crisis units that go out and that could do de-escalation techniques, that can provide resources. We need to create circles, create restorative justice circles. So those that have been harmed and those that are doing the harm, they could talk to one another and see, and come to a common ground, figure out the harm, the needs, and take accountability for their actions. There are many different resources that we could use instead of locking those people up that have mental health illness, or just locking people up in general. We deserve a world full of prisons, but free of cages. And we deserve a world where we have access to our basic needs. And if we address the basic needs, the root causes, we can lower the number of people that go into the prison system, that go into the system, and then come out worse than what they have. Because as Chico mentioned, there isn't any rehabilitative services. When we think of jail, when we think of prison, we think, oh, it's a rehabilitative service. They're going in to do good. We know that's not the case. when prisons don't think of, let's create these social services or pod mapping so they could have success when they walk out of these walls. They only think about the recidivism. Of course, those with mental health issues, those who don't have their root causes addressed, they're going to come back. They're going to have a high recidivism rate because when you walked out those doors, you didn't set them up for success in or outside.
Yeah, and I think that speaks directly to the work that Maya and Beyond the Bars are pushing forward and wanting to learn more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to speak about some of that. So first of all, I just want to, the campaign work around the phone calls is, and I think a lot of the work that And the Exception is, or that Worth Rises is doing around this sort of like corporate focus. I think there was a question I saw in the chat around how do you kind of get around the political climate, right? The politics are so difficult in Florida. Everything gets preempted. We have people who are just nuts, right? And who are in our state government and our local governments. And I think that one of the things that we've really thought about is this corporate angle. What role are corporations playing in increasing sentencing laws, in these solitary confinement laws, even in death penalty cases, right? There are corporations that are making money off of selling the drugs that are being used to kill people. And so there are actually, when we think about what is the profit, what is the motive, like these things are really, really important questions. And so I just wanted to quickly name a couple of successful campaigns actually in Florida around the free phone calls. Gainesville passed a series of changes to make phone calls free, to get rid of daily subsistence, basically like pay to stay laws inside of their jails. And we did that in Miami as well. And so basically in Miami, Beyond the Bars ran a campaign to make all phone calls free out of the jail system, to make all video calls free, to get rid of all electronic monitoring. So the GPS systems that they put on people when they're on house arrest, we got all of those costs eliminated. There were about $100 million worth of debt that corrections was putting on people that they were slapping them with when they came home. And it was adding up onto people's credit reports, right? You come home, you get hit with a credit report issue because you didn't pay your fees to the jail. And so over the last 3 years, we ran campaigns to get rid of about $10 million annually of fees. That's crazy. $10 million of fees that the jail every year was charging to people, and more than $100 million worth of debt that they had racked up against people in Miami-Dade County. And so some of these things, right, like these are some interventions that make a huge difference on people's day-to-day lives. And then when we think about the corporate angle to this, it's really interesting because there are these massive corporations, right? Amazon, Walmart, that create these sort of like re-entry programs, second chance hiring initiatives in order to actually engage in union busting because they don't want to pay workers more. So they know, right, that there are people who are working for free in prisons, who are working for almost nothing in work release camps, who are desperate for work on probation because if you don't work, you can go back to prison, or you can go back to jail if you can't pay your fines and fees or just by the requirements of your probation itself. And so what they do is they start partnering with reentry organizations saying, we're actually going to bring people into these jobs knowing that the likelihood of them organizing for a union, organizing for better work conditions is actually a lot less once you kind of have been strapped by the system. And so I think this whole corporate angle, right? And then you have, these are some of the corporations that sit on APEC, that are sitting on these governing bodies across the country and especially in the South, that are passing really harsh sentencing laws, that are passing these policies, right, that we're talking about. And so I think, I think it's a two-pronged approach, right? There's the government side, there's the policy side, and then there's the corporate side. What is this shadow government doing behind that's influencing the way that that's influencing the way that these politicians are moving? And I think we have to think about both of them. And that kind of brings me back to, what St. James was saying earlier about capitalism, right? What is the root of these problems? If we're thinking about capitalism, it is the nature, right, of the capitalist class to the working class. And the nature of that relationship is really one between workers and capitalists, right? People who have money and people who are working for people who have money. And so the goal of the capitalist class is always going to be to push wages lower and lower and lower and lower, exploit people more and more and more and more. And so when we think about how our people fit into that, like we have to, like, that's one way to start kind of like disentangling that relationship and figuring out how to challenge it. So that's kind of how we think about it from our end. And I think it's interesting, right? Because even in a place like Florida, there are still some wins that we've seen throughout the state that are pretty big, that are also, you know, really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to get into that a bit more, and wanting to first bring Seth back. I think part of when people think about like wrongful convictions, wrongful incarceration, it's like once people are free in general, released, or not free, but released from jail, that everything is fine. And what we found is the journey is just beginning. The journey is long. It is not linear. There's a lot that comes to a constant reclaiming of one's freedom after it has been taken away, often for decades. And Seth, wanting to bring you forward just to kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Saskia. I mean, I think I always, when I'm sitting at the prison or the jail with my client, the day they're going to walk out of prison, you know, I say to them, like, I had this client who's, his nickname in prison was like Big Dummy. He's like a huge guy and has a huge head and a huge neck, and he's freaking out because he's scared about leaving the jail, right? And I put my hand around his big neck and looked him in the eyes and said to him, you know, this is the first chance you have to introduce yourself to the world, but it's only the first chance. Every day you're going to have to, you know, reintroduce yourself and prove yourself, because no matter the fact that you're wrongfully convicted and a court overturned your conviction and the state dropped the charges and you're considered an exonerated person, there's always going to be people every single day at jobs, at church, at wherever you are, that are going to doubt you. And so it doesn't feel right. But the work really just begins when you walk out of, you know, that jail. And he was in prison for 30 years and he went in at 16. So which added challenges for him. So I do think that, you know, one role that you know, our project plays, that not all organizations that do the similar work to us have the resources to play, is we realized in like 2006, that it's a long time ago, that we're like a bunch of you know, as Stephen said, movement lawyers. Similar, you know, we're part of a new civil rights movement that's designed to shed light on this phenomena of wrongful convictions and get people out of prison, but we're not equipped to do to manage the hard work of helping men and women move through the daily struggles of their life and find stability. And so we're the first innocence organization in the country to hire a full-time social worker, a person still on our staff, and we're expanding our social services, transitional services department, which we provide both therapeutic services as well as full case management, really everything. And our whole goal is to get our clients you know, the education or job training they need. We help them find jobs, make sure they have sort of the critical foundational needs met. You know, do I have a roof over my head? Do I have access to high quality healthcare, vision, dental? I mean, the dental and vision in prison is horrific. The medical care in prison is horrific. Our clients come out of prison with, you know, high cholesterol, heart disease, horrible teeth problems. And, you know, we've worked with other organizations to find dentists that will do, I mean, we've probably done, you know, $100,000 or more of pro bono or low bono dental care for our clients. You know, these types of things. We want to make sure they have access to transportation so they can get to their appointments, access to psychological care, everything you can kind of think of that is going to be, that a lot of us take for granted on the outside, but that are absolutely necessary ingredients for someone just to make it through their day, their week, their year, so they can find strength and stability. We've heard folks here talk about families, and when someone comes out of prison after long-term incarceration, their families like super unbelievably excited to see them to the extent they have that family support. But like once those cameras go away and they get, you know, the media go away and they get over that initial excitement of coming home, they have to reintegrate a person who hasn't been in their life for, you know, 10, 20, or 30 years back into the family structure. And it creates all kinds of tension and uneasiness. And so we work with family members of our clients, to the extent that's what our clients want, to help them build strong, or rebuild strong family bonds to the extent they've been broken by wrongful incarceration. So it's like, the thing that's really important to me is that we talk about like, what can we do? And there's like a million things that we can do to prevent wrongful convictions and decarcerate. But we have to have people who can be ambassadors for that work. And you know, I can go to the Florida legislature and talk to, you know, the 70% of them who don't have the same political views as me, who are not initiating this work, and they just see me as sort of, you know, this crazy lawyer who comes to the legislature. But when they sit in front of a client, an individual, a man, a woman, a person who is the victim of that miscarriage of justice, and they have to listen to their story and hear their voice and see their face and see their tears, it makes a huge difference. I know that when there was a big movement to get the legislature and the governor to pardon and apologize to the Groveland Four. When I was going around the legislature working on bills, I saw on every single desk a copy of Gilbert King's Devil in the Grove. And I talked to legislators about that who read the book and I never thought about these issues and were impacted by it. And they met with people who were wrongfully convicted and exonerated, and it changed their view. And like those interactions have opened the door for us to accomplish so many things policy-wise at the legislature in a landscape that is incredibly difficult with a governor who is not favorable to these things. And so, you know, we're really committed to building our clients up after they get out, not so they can be whole people, not only so they can be whole people, but all of them to a person want to give back and help prevent what happened to them. And they're the best ambassadors to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Seth. And I think part of what you're bringing forward is advocacy and how we can better do that and do that on a more expanded level. So I'm wondering from all of you how advocacy efforts can better be aligned to address these systemic issues that are contributing to these overlaps that we're thinking through and we're examining, and wanting to start with St. James in that.
Yeah, before I get into the advocacy question, I've just heard so much from all these awesome panelists that I've been wanting to comment on, but you know, being patient. But yeah, in Florida, we absolutely are at ground zero, where we're dealing with a state and a government that is just hostile towards people. As Maya was reiterating, this is all about profit. Everything is profit driven in this capitalist society. So these prison corporations, they are corporations, one of the largest being Geo Group, right? They don't only own the biggest prisons in the entire country, they also own the biggest immigration detention centers. So don't get it twisted. ICE, prison system, police are all intertwined. The reason there's so much focus on this border, whether you're talking about Democrats or Republicans, both Harris and Trump are talking about immigrants as though they're less than human, is because they want to keep these beds in these prisons and in these immigration centers filled, right? States have to pay money whenever there's empty beds in these prisons. So these prisons and these governments in these states do everything they can to keep the beds in these prisons filled up. That's why the state of Florida just passed a law saying it's illegal to sleep in public. Can you imagine that? It's illegal to sleep in public. So that's just for everybody. Now think about homeless people, houseless people on these streets. They're just finding different ways to criminalize people so they can keep filling up these beds, right? I remember y'all was talking about solitary confinement, and I had to look it up real quick. And yeah, under the United Nations Charter, under all the civilized nations of the world, solitary confinement is absolutely torture. absolute torture. No other country in the world, except for the United States, practices it so readily, right? And then I remember we were talking about alternatives. I think I heard Shatara talking about alternatives, talking about restorative justice and circle keeping. And I do believe that's one of the main reasons that Black Men Build believes in our men's circle and our women's circle and our Ujima circles, what we call it when we have co-ed circles going on, right? Because there has to be alternatives to this, right? There has to be, there has been infinite amounts of reports from academics and scholars that show that punishment does not work to deter bad behavior, right? That's why there's a high recidivism rate. That's why people get locked up, they come out, do the same thing, and go back in. That's what the system wants. It makes them money. They don't want anybody rehabilitated, right? It's kind of like this medical system. They don't want to cure you. They would just want to keep treating you, right? Keep you on these drugs and stuff. It's the same with the prison system. So that's why we do have alternatives. All of these organizations here, I feel blessed to be part of y'all, are creating alternatives like the Healing and Justice Center, like Black Men Build. We have our men's circle because we do believe in circle keeping for purposes of restorative justice, for purposes of conflict mediation. If we can't talk to each other, then we can't deal with the infinite amount of things going on in our communities, right? And yeah, advocacy is super important because, again, there's just a war. There's just a war going on against Black people, against Indigenous people, against poor people in this country. And I remember Chico was talking about the rights restoration, which is a long fight that we had here, that we had to fight to get 1.5 million ex-felons their right to vote, among other things. You know, in a lot of states, once you get locked up and you pay your debt to society, you still are, you're a returning citizen, but you're not really a citizen. You can't vote, you can't get federal benefits. If you want to go to college, you can't get school loans. So we went through a very long, hard fight in the state of Florida to change that. And we actually won that fight. It was a great fight. It was led by some awesome individuals, Chico included. And then our wonderful Governor DeSantis put a poll tax on it, right? After we went through this long, hard fight, said, okay, if y'all want y'all rights back, y'all got to pay fines, y'all got to pay fees, y'all got to essentially pay poll taxes. So advocacy is super important because we got to fight a-holes like DeSantis, right? Because we have these government institutions that profit off of locking people up. So we have things like letter writing campaigns. We have things like, I remember I was part of a poetry group that would go to prisons to teach and read poetry to people who are incarcerated. Just growing up, I had family members where the only ways they could see their uncles or my uncles, their fathers, was by going to prison every Christmas to go see them. And isolation is what capitalism does. It wants you to believe in individualism and isolation, right? And we got to do the opposite. We have to build stronger communities. And that's what Black Men Build is all about. That's where we're constantly connecting with incarcerated people and people who've been recently released, with elders, political prisoners. We had a phone call with the great Matulu Shakur before he passed, where he was telling us about his experiences and how we can be part of this very long struggle for abolition. Understand that we're not fighting for prison reform, and this is not a new fight that we're fighting. This is something that has been going on since the times of slavery, since Frederick Douglass to Harriet Tubman. We like to say we are the sons of Harriet Tubman. That's who Black Men Build is, right? All the way down to W.E.B. Du Bois. They were all abolitionists, right? And they understood, especially W.E.B. Du Bois, which was post-slavery, understood that slavery didn't end, it just transitioned into police and prisons. So educating ourselves and advocating so that we don't lose touch with our political prisoners. And you know what? Everybody in my book, anybody who's locked up is a political prisoner, right? Because this country is making money off of you, right? And most times, people don't commit crime because they want to. They commit crime because they have to, right? Because they want to feed their families. If we had jobs, every study shows that jobs, a working economy is what stops crime. Police don't stop crime. Prisons don't stop crime. They don't respond to violence. They increase violence. The only thing that stops crime is jobs, education, and a robust economy. So these are the things we have to advocate for. And the way that we advocate for these things is by joining an organization. The more radical, the better. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, St. James. I want to continue this conversation or this question of advocacy, but I think that's also a really great segue into this idea that a new world is possible. You brought up some really great points, and the crux of it is, if we know that this isn't working and it's harming, it's continued to perpetuate harm, what do we do in response to that? How do we build something that actually responds, addresses, creates solutions, and create something better that will sustain us, that will enable thriving, not just surviving, or the opposite in some cases. And wanting to begin that conversation with Shatara.
Yes, advocacy is extremely important, especially with Dream Defenders, which is a Black-led political organization where we fight for our future. We believe that we have the right to exist, the right to live, the right to have our basic human rights met. We have these rights that right now aren't given to us. We have to fight for it. So as St. James said, joining organizations that fight and align with your political or just your goals in life, as well as I think we should call really for the increase in budget. So instead of giving all the police all this money, their budget increases every year into billions of dollars. We need to call for them to decrease their budget and to give it out to the community where it's needed, especially the marginalized community, because it's one thing for them to say, oh, we have built these things for you guys. We have given you access to these things, but they're giving access to those that already have it, those that already don't need it. We need to have that access in marginalized community. We need to call for more mental health services, especially when it comes to everyday life, everyday people, when we destigmatizing mental health. We also need to call for them for having more restorative justice circles and finding alternatives to policing, alternatives to being jailed. We need to be able to build stronger communities. And by doing this, by doing public awareness, having just campaigns, we could fight for advocacy. We could fight for the things that we want, deserve, and need. We also sorry, lost my train of thought, but we also should be calling for just the increase of more how can the police aren't equipped. So what can we stand in place for the police? Is it mental health professionals? That might be a thing. Is it calling for more programs, social programs? So we need to figure out what exactly do we need, what can help. With the homeless trust, they're not doing anything in Florida. They're just taking all the money and not building the houses. And in Florida and Miami specifically, we know that we have a housing crisis. And all the clients that I've come in contact with is that's their main problem is, I need a house. I need somewhere to stay. I don't care about fixing any trauma that came along the way. I don't care about following the rules when I need someplace to stay. And like St. James said, with DeSantis criminalizing sleeping on the streets, not even sleeping on the streets. If you read the law, it's even congregated in large groups. So just us being out talking and canvassing and doing outreach, we're subject to being fined and jailed because we're in a large group and we're congregating. So I feel like the first thing we need to do is go to the homeless trust. Tell them stop giving them this money, give it to the local organizations that do the work in the neighborhoods, in the community. The homeless trusts are so far gone that they don't know what's going on. They don't know, they don't see what's going on that we see every day because we're the ones that's on the street. We're the ones that's doing the work. We need to build more shelters. We need to create more jobs, more employments.
Yeah, thank you. And Chico, I see your hand wanting to give you the mic.
I'm gonna be honest. For us to advocate for people, I think we need to one of the things we're doing with Black Man Bill, we're actually finding out the people who can make the changes. Us trying to advocate ourselves is not going to be the reason. So that means we need to go to our local commission meetings. We need to know who's in charge. We need to be writing letters to those people. We need to be actually attacking those particular people. We get on a lot of calls like this, and we like attacking the homeless trust. They're not going to do anything. We need to attack the people who giving the money to the homeless trust. You know, we need to start doing effective stuff like that. I've been working with Beyond the Bars. They've been doing that a lot. You know, Sister Cat is one of our members, also a Black Man Bill, and she actually pushed us towards going to those meetings and learning about those things, learning who's in charge. So those are some of the steps we're taking right now to try to actually, you know, advocate for ourselves. We basically got to be the ones to advocate for ourselves, because people are not going to do it. Like a place like I said, I don't know anything about the homeless trust. I can't speak on them, but nobody's not going to give up their money and start just giving it away because we say so. So we need to find the people who are in charge and make them allocate those funds to where they need to go. That's the way I feel about that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chico. And Maya.
Just following up with what Chico said, and specifically his mention of Kat. Like Kat says this all the time, right? Sorry, Kat's our co-director. Just so for people on the call who don't know, I talk like everybody knows her. But
everybody does know Kat. It's okay.
But yeah, you know, like I think Shatera, you asked this question, like, how do we create more jobs? How do we create more employment? You know, advocacy is one tool. It's a tactic. But Kat always says, like, there needs to be a clear strategy with diverse tactics that engage people to develop their leadership and win better conditions. And St. James said it, right? Like, you only do this for an organization. You don't do this through an organization. You don't do this by yourself. You need to come together with other people through a process to learn how to run a campaign, to learn how to develop a strategy together, to develop the leadership, to develop the skills of everyday people who are just going through it. That's how I got started 15 years ago. My ex was in prison, and I was trying to figure out what to do when he came home. You know, that's how everybody in our organization comes into our organization. I think that's the case with Black Men Build as well, where, you know, you have everyday people who are going through things. What the power that we have is the power of our numbers. We far outnumber the people who are at the top, right? They have money, we have people power. And so in order to actually organize that power, you have to find an organization that you can join, learn how to run campaigns, learn how to build strategy, and then learn how to move that strategy. And like I said, and what Kat says, right? Advocacy is one tool. There's other things, right? Advocacy meaning speaking to public elected officials. There's direct actions that people take. There's so many different ways. There's litigation strategies, there are legal strategies, right? That Florida Innocence Project is talking about. There's so many different things that you can think about. What is your target? What's your goal? And how are you trying to move towards that goal using as many different levers and as many different pressure points as you have to get leverage over your target?
Yeah, thank you for that, Maya. Wanting to bring forth Stephen, because some of what we've been talking about is advocacy, and specifically around repairing harm. And I know a lot of the work that you do centers that. So wanting to go to you and then kick it over to Chico.
So thank you for that. Wow, it was just so much. But when it comes to the question of advocacy, it's, you know, Maya made a great point. It's multi-layered. There's so many different ways. You know, one size does not fit all. You know, it really is about setting your goal. You know what it is that you want to do. You know who your targets are, and then you need the people power, because we don't have money power, the people power to make this happen, right? And so this is where the organizing piece can come in. And I have this conversation with my homie up in Virginia. Shout out to Natasha, who runs the Virginia campaign. She's listening and watching. And it's about that. It's about, yeah, because my title is Justice Advocate Coordinator. So advocacy is our priority. So what does that mean? Using solitary confinement again. So we have 10,000 people in solitary confinement. We don't have a robust coalition to push legislation, right? And so we're literally starting from scratch. every year, even though we had 2 bills that were introduced this last session, and both of them, right after introduction, they were dead. They never made it to past introduction. And it's been that way in the state of Florida pretty much since, you know, the FSU solitary confinement work group has been working around, you know, years ago, ending solitary. And this is the group that I joined. And then now, you know, through Latino Justice, I've been able to create the Florida Coalition on Solitary. And so what does it mean? It means now we draft a new bill. We look for new sponsors. We do workshops and trainings, and we train folks on how to be storytellers, on the, you know, the system of government that we have, and what does it mean to do direct advocacy. You know, we organize people. We do community, you know, engagements. And so in that, and those are just, you know, a few pieces. And I think that one of the to use an example of Virginia, we did a training 3 years ago. We started doing a training, and in just 3 years, you know, the folks and in the coalition, including us and some other people in the state, were able to get the solitary bill to the governor's desk. You know, and that was something that, you know, we're talking about the South still. Virginia is still the South. So of course he vetoed it. And yet it's a small v victory, because now we're going to build off of that. But that, when we're talking about advocacy, super duper important. And I'm going to end with one last thing with regards to advocacy and organizing, which I mentioned, right? Coalition building and that kind of piece. We also write fact sheets, and we do analysis and that kind of stuff. Language and narrative is super duper important, especially coming from us in leadership. I'm wearing a shirt by Eddie Ellis and Larry White Lukman. Eddie Ellis is the one who created the letter on language over 20 years ago, and I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't say that. I heard the word inmate and offender used today by my fellow leaders, and I have to say, ouch. You know, I think that we have a responsibility as leaders to also, you know, check ourselves, make sure that we are on point, and that we are not perpetuating dehumanizing language, because that turns into thought turns into action, turns into policy, turns into messed up relationships. And so I want to just end with that piece right there, because it's super duper important, you know, that we use humanizing language, especially as leaders, you know, in this field. And that's also part of it too, because when we do the trainings and the workshops, we train folks on using, you know, humanizing language, people first language. And so it really is a part of that whole question, coming back to the whole advocacy question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for that calling in and just really exemplifying how essential that is and how it's connected. Wanting to pass it to Chico and then Seth.
Okay, I just wanted to reiterate something Maya was saying, and it has to do with, okay, so we had and that's why I say knowing who your people are in charge, and knowing who the people you could actually talk to get stuff done. We had a problem with our Little Haiti Trust in Miami. They wasn't even giving them a chance to actually have Little Haiti Trust meetings, do anything to move the money that was allocated to the people. And all we did was find out who the person was in charge, and we started emailing and making phone calls to that person. Within a week, 2 weeks time, now we're sitting in front of this person. Within the next week, we have the trust back up and running. Like I said, it can happen, because like I said, like Maya said, it's power is money and people. We have the people. We just gotta mobilize and organize the people and get them to actually get out and do the work. Like I said, we outnumber them by far. It's not even close. We just need to organize the people to do it, and that's all I have to say on that.
Exactly. If I could just add some context to what Chico was saying, for those of you who's not in South Florida, Little Haiti is a small immigrant Haitian community facing serious climate gentrification, where these rich people on South Beach understand that the water's rising, and they're pushing people out. They're pushing immigrants out of Little Haiti, because Little Haiti actually sits above sea level, just as with a lot of other poor Black neighborhoods in Miami, Overtown, Liberty City, Little Haiti. They all sit above sea level. These rich white folks on the beach are starting to realize that, and they're buying up property and pushing people out. So there was a trust board that was created in Little Haiti to help basically, for lack of a better word, facilitate the gentrification, or at the very least, be a voice for the people while the gentrification was going on. None of that was happening. The trust board stopped meeting. There was nothing going on, and no amount of money could have gotten this trust board going. But what Chico and a bunch of other leaders in Black Men Build did, our current lead organizer, my brother Tucson, I'm sure he's on the call, is we just started sending emails, started making phone calls, You know, not just one person, not just two people. We did a phone tree. We reached out to members and we're like, hey, in the next couple of days, let's call these people. Because yes, like Maya, like Chico said, they will always have more money than us. They got billions, they got trillions, but they will never have more people. We will always beat them with the people power. So I just wanted to add that context there.
Thank you for that. And Seth.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always building on things Stephen says. So thank you for laying the foundation, Stephen. When I was starting in this work and being thrust, I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm from a different place than Florida, and coming down here, not being initiated in the political culture here, in the way things get done in Tallahassee, it caused a lot of frustration. Trying to convince people of things that I knew were right and just, who didn't think like me, didn't see them through the same lens. And the beauty of working here is that you're forced to understand how to, or learn how to talk to the people who have power and be able to convince them of the righteousness of what you're trying to accomplish, and also understanding that it necessarily requires tremendous amounts of patience, and to try to have from a strategic standpoint, to have the longest view in the room. The beauty for me of getting involved with this work in my 20s and now being in my 40s is that I looked at all of the people who were much older than me, who were creating the inertia and the barriers, and said, I'm going to outlive you, and I'm gonna get this done, even if it takes me being here when you're long gone. And so, I think about working 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 years on a single legislative campaign, working my way up from having, my, beautiful Democratic sponsors from Broward County to powerful Republican sponsors who were not like my people, who also sponsor the NRA bills, but have the juice to, for whatever reason, they want to work on my stuff and get them done. And, it's sort of funny when you get to that point and for example, we talk about police pass a big prescriptive piece of legislation that requires all law enforcement agencies in Florida to do witness identification procedures in scientifically sound ways. And if they don't, there's sanctions involved. It's another thing I ever thought we'd ever be able to get past. And when it sailed through our last year, and I was almost angry about it because it was so easy. And my wife, I came home and she, my spouse, she said to me, it wasn't easy. It was all those years you put in leading up to that point that led to the moment. So you have to do that work over time. And I do. So it's the patience and having the longest view in the room, I think, is important, and finding the centers of power and working your way towards them to be able to, accrue those allies, to be able to get them to run your stuff. It's easy, for example, the police unions, the police association, the sheriff's association, the unions, they stand in the way in the background of your stuff that you're doing, until you find that Republican legislator who you've figured out is going to be in leadership in 6 years and going to be head of the Judiciary Committee, or maybe the speaker designate, and all of a sudden they can't kill your stuff in the background anymore because you now have the support of the power structure who's going to be able to get that done. But it just takes years to do that. And I do want to mention one more thing, and I'll pass it on, is that, again, it makes for strange bedfellows, but we're at the Innocence Project of Florida, Saskia, another one of our colleagues, Carly Mazem, and I are working with folks within law enforcement to create a wrongful convictions training module that we're going to pilot at one agency in Florida, for all new law enforcement agents or cadets, police officers, but also existing ones, and in the hope of building it out over a course of years to become part of the mandatory training for all new police cadets in Florida. It'd be part of the statewide training program. And it's like, while we are working on these alternatives to policing, and while we're working on these alternatives to incarceration, we want to be focused on harm reduction too, to change how they do things until we can get to the point where we have better methods. And we want to live in a world where, like, what would it be like if every law enforcement officer on the street was sensitized to the fact that they can be part of putting someone in prison who didn't commit that crime, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're hoping in 5 or 6 years you'll be seeing something more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Seth. And wanting to pass it to Alyssa, especially as we're talking through what's possible, and the work that Worth Rises is doing.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I mean, I wanted to chime in here. I feel like the theme of this call is like building. And I think that is pervasive amongst this, this group of folks that is on this panel, because we all engage in this work in very similar, but also kind of different ways across the board. And even as we continue to impact the system, we build on each other's work all the time. And so I wanted to kind of take that theme and talk a little bit about how, corporations show up in every aspect of the prison system. We started to build this theme of capitalism and how that can impact our carceral system. And I wanted to kind of, add to this idea of advocacy needing to be diverse and having multiple strategies, to add that like abolition, police and prison abolition does not happen in a world where these mega corporations are invested in the system. And so as folks are thinking about getting involved or developing campaigns, would love to encourage folks to think about the ways that corporations and also government officials, also, local stakeholders are invested in these systems. And so we want to highlight particularly in Florida that the Department of Corrections takes commissions off of the provision of phone calls. Very likely your local sheriff does too. I think we all know the ways that, incarcerated people make goods for the state of Florida, particularly in the state house. All of the furniture there is made by incarcerated people. And so really looking at the ways that your community is touching these different sectors without, maybe you even knowing. If you're a public employee, perhaps your local pension is invested into a corporation that provides services to local prisons and jails. We've seen that happen in other states. I'm not particularly 100% sure about Florida. But yeah, encouraging folks to really take a look at how, these corporations are showing up in your community and beyond in the state, because it's extremely important.
Thank you so much for that, Alyssa. I see a couple hands up. We're about at time. So I want to call forward Shatara first, and in whatever you're going to say, also centering what keeps you hopeful in this work as we get ready to leave the call, and any calls to action you want to bring light to for folks to stay engaged. I saw that Stephen put his contact information in the chat, encouraging all the panelists to do that as well.
Yes, what keeps me hopeful in this work is knowing that there is a possibility of change, knowing that we can do change. As being a boots on the ground worker and seeing the impact that some of the alternatives that we have talked about on this call, I know that it's possible. And I know that each organization on this call is doing the work that they can to make a better future for us. So that's what keeps me hopeful. If you guys want to join Dream Defenders or volunteer with the Healing and Justice Center, I will put the contact information in the chat, but you can also visit dreamdefenders.org, where we have different squads throughout the country. You could join a squad, or you can join the Healing and Justice Center, which is situated in Miami. And our number is 1-866-SAFE-MIA. And I'll put that once again in the chat.
Thank you so much, Shatara. I want to pass it to St. James.
Quick answer, all of you beautiful people keep me very hopeful. But I had a few comments that I definitely wanted to make as well. Joining an organization, super important. I'd say something just as important, equally as important, is continuing to educate ourselves. Political education is uber important. Critical thinking is uber important. It's why, in terms of what is hopeful, I have to be straightforward. Training the police to be more humane, I don't believe is hopeful. Coming up with alternatives to policing, as Alyssa was saying, defunding, divesting, getting these corporations out of our legal system, I do believe that is possible. But quick story is we had a police training down here in Miami by one of our partner organizations. They were actually got in partnership with the police, with Miami PD, to train them on how to better deal with people and how to be more civil and humane when dealing with people. I think about a year or something into this program, one of those cops shot a mentally ill man. Yeah, about 16 times, right? When the mom specifically called 911 and said, please don't shoot my son. It's just, again, if we politically educate ourselves, we understand where policing has come from, that is who they are. We cannot change the nature of policing because that's who policing and prisons are, right? What we can do, though, is figure out how to take all the billions, and I do mean billions of dollars that goes to these police departments and these fake police unions. Police unions are not unions because police aren't workers. Okay, police aren't workers, so they cannot have unions, no matter what they call themselves. But figuring out how to take that money and put it into more humane services, like what we got with the Healing and Justice Center. So I see where you were coming from, Shatara, or mental health services, or the infinite amount of things that our community needs, but we don't have funding for because we give it to the police, because we give it to all these other entities. So I would say that's my advocacy bit, right? Educate ourselves, join a radical organization. And I would say what keeps me hopeful is every single person on this phone call. The fact that we got people, you know, no matter what you look like, no matter where you're from, you're standing up to fight this wicked, evil system. I have nothing but love and respect for you all, and that keeps me very hopeful.
Thank you, St. James. Wanting to pass to Maya.
Yeah, I mean, what keeps me hopeful is this, it's organizations that are doing good work and actually changing conditions. It's seeing those wins and then thinking about how to replicate them or shift them for our local context. And yeah, I mean, I think that's all I really have to say. That's what keeps me grounded. What keeps me grounded is my family. What keeps me hopeful is the work of organizations.
Yeah, you know.
By the way, there's a bunch of people that are pinned that are Maya Ragsdale that aren't actually me. Just so you know. Yeah.
Sure. Passing to Seth.
I mean, similar to other folks, I mean, what keeps me hopeful is constantly being able to meet folks like you. We've had a number of these teach-ins, and thank you to Saskia for continually putting them together. And you know, sometimes I feel like at an organization like ours, which is, you know, a lawyer-driven, legal work-driven organization, sometimes we feel very siloed. And to be able to connect with people who we create concentric circles with, who are moving in, you know, parallel to us in similar directions on various issues, and we're all sort of trying to accomplish the same things, but just in different spaces, is really inspiring. And I find, you know, when I think about what happened last week in Missouri that I talked about before, and one of my best friends was Marcellus Williams' lawyer, and seeing how beat down she was, and thinking to myself, like, why do we do this to ourselves? It is things like this, like calls like this, learning and learning from all of you that really keep me hopeful and keep me going. So thank you. And yeah, and the only, I guess looking forward, the only thing else I would say is that we talk about joining a radical organization, join a small organization, right? That has, the world is chaotic. It feels sometimes like it's moving in on you. And, you know, I've always tried to focus on the things that I can control and make progress on. And so all of us here are working in tiny spaces in many respects. And I think that allows us to really be strategic and focused and be able to accomplish a lot and make progress and move forward. And so welcome everyone to get in touch with us at the Innocence Project of Florida and all the organizations here on this call.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. And Stephen.
Yes, I know we're running out of time. So the Florida Coalition for Criminal Justice Reform. Join I'm on the steering committee of that organization. LatinoJustice is on the steering committee. We're also working with the Florida Restorative Justice Association. I'm on the board. So the Florida Restorative Justice Association, I'm on the board. They're a membership organization, very important. And then lastly, I put on there our FIP Academy. So our FIP Academy is a training course that we have, and it's for formerly incarcerated people. It doesn't matter if they came home 10 years ago or they came home 10 days ago. You know, they could sign up, and it's a training course. It's about a month and a half, and we give them a stipend. You know, it's everything from mass incarceration to slavery, abolition versus reform, you know, and it's really geared towards training folks that want to get into the field of legislative advocacy, and that's the FIP Academy. So please sign up and share it. And then what keeps me hopeful is I work in a civil rights organization with a lot of young attorneys, a lot of up and coming, you know, young civil rights movement lawyers who are just, you know, ready to take this on and carry this forward. And I've been a part of just being in these spaces, and it's just been a blessing. And lastly, I've also been part, because I've been here 18 years, I've been part of some victories. You know, there've been people who weren't supposed to come home that was sentenced to life without parole. You know, one of my good friends that I grew up with, you know, he was never supposed to come home. We developed a campaign, letter writing, whatever, attorneys. He came home, you know, almost 18 years, and he's free. You know, we look at things like the exonerated 5 in Central Park, you know, Oscar Lopez Rivera, you know, and so these things give me hope.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I want to say, Alyssa, you started, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I can round this off if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's similar to everyone else on this call. These spaces and the people that show up and are really dedicated to this fight. Even the folks that just want to learn more, y'all keep me hopeful. And I will say in particular, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I moved to the Northeast about a year and a half ago, and Florida is such a big part of my heart that being in this space right now is very I feel at home, and I appreciate all of y'all for creating that space for me in particular. But yeah, I mean, I'll say that in terms of the work that Worth Rises is doing, we are constantly engaging in campaigns where we are pushing back on corporations. And so visit our website, check it out. I put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to connect. We also have Connecting Families campaigns in over a dozen states across the country. And so if that's of interest to you, feel free to reach out to me. Also wanted to end off and say that there was a recent ruling from the Federal Communications Commission that is going to dramatically lower phone calls and video calls rates across the country. Florida is one of those states where they have been doing so badly that they're going to get pummeled by this new ruling, thankfully. Thank you, Saskia, for putting this up on the slides a little bit. But yeah, so if you are someone that is in the state of Florida and really concerned about the issue of the cost of telecommunications, just know that relief is on the horizon, but we will continue to fight to make those communications free.
Yeah, thank you so much. We could not be more grateful for the over 100 people that were on this call, engaging in this work, dreaming with us, figuring out what it means to do this work in a sustainable way. Join, contact the panelists, and we look forward to connecting with you further at